Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome again to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on both Clubhouse and Twitter, Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube, SCOTMCKAY. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com. And if you are not part of our Facebook group yet, which is the Mountaintop Summit, go get you some on Facebook. It's a good group, guys. Be a part of it. With me today is a new friend of mine. Her name is Jan Edwards, and she is the president of Paving the Way Foundation. And today we're going to talk about a very important topic, if perhaps a bit uncomfortable of one, which is how to be protectors for our children, certainly, but maybe even for our wives and girlfriends and ourselves when it comes to sexual predation. How do we keep our kids from being sexually abused? What are the warning signs? How can we not turn a blind eye to it? And most of all, what can we do about it to make sure it doesn't happen, or God forbid if it does happen? From Orlando, Florida, Jan Edwards. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Scott. Very, very happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy you're here too, because this is one of those conversations that people tend to shy away from, publicly and privately, I might add. And yet it's a very important one, because we as guys, our instinct is to be heroes for those we love in particular. Our families, our wives, our kids. And if we are not equipped to identify and do something about this evil out there in the universe, then, we're falling short, aren't we?
Yes, we need men to stand up, stand with, and stand in the gap with us in this fight for sure.
Now, I think one thing that we should definitely do before we start talking about the core topic here is to throw on the table that there is indeed a stereotype that men are the monsters out there and women are the victims. But that's not necessarily true, is it? There are a lot of men out there who have been, sexually assaulted, even trafficked. And there are a lot of women out there who are complicit, if not the main bad actors, in these particular trafficking or sexually abusive scenarios. Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, being a famous example, right?
Right. I'm so glad you brought this up. And you didn't ask the question, but you asked the question by bringing it up, right? What people don't know is most victims of whether it's human trafficking, abuse, online exploitation, anything that has anyone that's suffered at the hand of a predator or trafficker, mostly, not all the time, mostly, they don't identify as a victim. And what I mean by that is, over time, the grooming process, over time, they become convinced that it's their fault. They wanted this, so they should continue to suffer. Okay, so that's what I want to say about this. So the conversation I'm about to have with you about percentages and numbers, they're our best guess, because people don't go, yep, I'm a victim of this. Yep, I'm a survivor of that. We don't, as human beings, we have a hard time talking about sex in the first place. And then you add on top of this the guilt, the shame, and the embarrassment that goes along with anything that has to do with sexual predatory behavior. People don't self-identify. That's what I want to state all of this with, okay? There are some real hard numbers that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children can give you and the Polaris Hotline can give us, and I'll share some of those. However, when it comes to percentages, it's mostly girls. It's about, 60% girls. However, that leaves about 30% of boys that are groomed, recruited.
Well, hold on, so you said 60 and 30.
Mm-hmm.
You're leaving 10% in the lurch there.
Yeah, well, because some are unidentified, right? And remember I said approximately. So it could be 65-35, it could be 70-30, it could be, so it's approximately 30% of people that are trafficked, groomed, and recruited are male.
Got it. Crystal clear. Go ahead.
Okay. Mostly the rest are female and or transgender. So you've got this group of individuals that have been, whether they were abused by a family member or a friend, the men being abused, or you've got men that were lured into something online by a woman. Women can be traffickers too. And inside the trafficking organization, so to speak, there is a role called the bottom girl. And her job is to keep the rest of the girls in line, keep the rest of the girls doing what they're supposed to do. They manage the money, they manage the appointments, they manage everything. They're like the trafficker's right-hand person.
For example, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yep, exactly. And even if you look at Jeffrey Epstein, okay, y'all can watch the Netflix docuseries called Filthy Rich. It's the same type of grooming and recruitment tactics, okay? And that is, I lure a girl in with false promises, right? I give her money, and then I say, you want to earn more money? Go get me more girls, right? So then again, you've got a young woman who's doing the bidding of the trafficker.
And the ironic truth there is she now feels like she's part of the team. Therefore, she can't possibly be abused by this. She's in on it. She's complicit in her own mind, but she has indeed been influenced to be in that position.
Well, yeah, and they feel like they don't have a choice. So that's the other piece too.
So it's kind of a weird Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, isn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more about grooming. Actually, we're going to talk a lot about it because there are definitely patterns there. Before we do that, though, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't define trafficking for these guys, because I think it's one of those terms that's a bit nebulous in the minds of some people. Some people think of it as only the extreme situations. Other people may be so trigger happy that they think, if I look at a woman, lustfully, then I've trafficked her or something like that. Kind of like, this person yelled at me and they raped me, which of course is an affront to anybody who's really been raped. But anyway, define trafficking for us in terms that you're comfortable with and that you use on a daily basis.
Sure. And I want to back up just a smidge.
Sure.
So, gentlemen, you understand who I am and what I do and why we're actually talking about this. Is I founded an organization 8 years ago that is out to empower communities to disrupt the cycle of child trafficking and exploitation through education awareness programs.
And that's what Paving the Way Foundation does.
That's what we do, right? So I have an exorbitant amount of hours standing in front of young people and parents and educators and healthcare professionals having this very conversation and getting feedback and information back. I also work with law enforcement and survivors and survivor support networks across the country. Okay, so this isn't, I don't operate in a bubble. I have a very wide and vast network, and I'm always attending webinars and conferences to make sure that my data that I share with the community is as accurate as humanly possible. And that's why I gave the caveat to the numbers up front. I have a really good friend who's a detective in Texas, as a matter of fact, and he's all about the how can you know the numbers? And that's why I give the caveat. So there are some numbers I can and will give you later. But so I wanted to give some context for why we're having this conversation with me. Now, to answer your question, people get confused with human trafficking and human smuggling. Okay, so let me define the difference between that, and then we'll talk about exactly what human trafficking is. Human smuggling is a crime against a country. It involves people coming into a nation, into a country illegally. That's human smuggling. And that's what we're seeing a lot at the southern border. Okay. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain something in return, whether that's labor or commercial sex. Now, here's the caveat. Okay. If you were a child under the age of 18, we don't have to prove force. We don't have to prove fraud. We don't have to prove coercion, because we're clear. No child under the age of 18 would willfully choose, nor is their brain developed enough to choose to become a victim of human trafficking. That's the distinction between human smuggling, human trafficking, and child trafficking.
So the question that springs forth from that is, Jan, what in the hell's going on in society right now? It just seems like we're being gaslit all over the place into thinking that, hey, you know what, this whole idea of old people having sex with young people, or, coercing them a little bit, or acting in a gray area here and there, isn't necessarily such a bad thing. I mean, the people are outliers for sure who are turning up in the media saying things like, hey, you know what? Pedophilia should be rebranded and recast as a sexual orientation. These people aren't evil, horrible people. They just think about sex differently than we do. Meanwhile, people are throwing things at the TV going, you got to be freaking kidding me. Lock these people up. How did this become okay? I mean, in the background, we've had organizations like NAMBLA and others, which are so absolutely preposterous that even South Park has episodes about them. And yet these people are allowed to somehow peacefully coexist with society. Then you have situations like the aforementioned Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell case, which by all rights, given the scope of what was happening and who it was happening with and the high profile people who were involved, should have created as much global outrage as the George Floyd case did. Yet it kind of didn't. I mean, Prince Andrew is probably getting his, but in my mind, basically this was a deal where the media didn't want to cover it because it hit too close to home for too many people who were involved with it, which to me just makes it even more disgusting. What do you have to say about all this?
So I'm going to start off by saying absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay. I'm going to leave that right there. Secondly, this has been going on for a very, very long time. And our children are our most valuable resource, and they're the most underserved during this period of time right now. And it's frustrating. It's something daily, on the daily, I have to just take a deep breath, keep my head down, and keep going, right? And this is my humble opinion. I have zero science behind this. I'm going to be as authentic and straightforward as I can be. And who's ever listening, if I insult you, not intentional. Okay.
Although if they're insulted by this, they probably should be insulted.
Exactly. I don't know. That's what I said. I'm not about that.
I'll bite. I'll throw that on the table. Go ahead.
So we live in an over-sexualized society. And you and I have talked about this, right? As human beings, we either look at the stimuli around us. Can we eat it? Is it going to eat us, or can we procreate with it? That's our midbrain, our little amygdala. That's what that does. And given the environment for the past 2 years of being sequestered away from our family, sequestered away from our jobs, not being able to do at the daily things we know and love to do, your mind just has a heyday. And where are you going to go? Where are you going to go to get that feeling of connection? Where are you going to get to go to have that feeling of love or support or appreciation or acknowledgement? Well, sometimes you go to places you don't want to go. And that breeds the willingness to either do, say, or participate in things that 3 years ago someone never would have. And at the highest levels, when I talk with my friends about human trafficking, remember, I talk to people all over the country and quite frankly, all over the world. And Prince Andrew is a great example. This goes to the highest levels of every single nation across the globe. Why? This is a $400 billion industry. One child is worth $250,000 a year because unlike drugs or guns, drugs are a one-time sale. I sell it to you, you buy it, you get high, you come back. It's back and forth. It's a high likelihood that I could get caught and put in jail. With people, I can sell that one thing over and over and over and over again.
Well, I want to stop you real quickly because about a minute ago, you kind of made it sound as if these predators are simply looking for something to make them feel better or be a part of something bigger, and they fall into this social group where they traffic young kids. But I don't think that's what you were trying to say.
No.
So clarify that for me, please.
Yeah. So look, you don't wake up one morning and decide you're going to be a predator. You don't do that.
Are you sure about that? I mean, listen, and here's why I ask. Okay.
Yeah. Well, hang on. There's been some interviews with traffickers, and when in Homeland Security, I was at a conference several years ago, and Homeland Security shared with us that over 90% of traffickers and predators are psychopaths. I don't know if we've done the science yet to prove that psychopaths are born. They might be. I think it's an over time phenomenon with in-home and external abuse. And something cuts off. There was a trafficker who trafficked 3 girls over in Tampa several years ago, and he was sentenced to 3 life sentences. And he was dumbfounded. And this was coming directly from the Homeland Security person that was speaking. It was his case. And he asked the trafficker asked if he could talk to the agents. And they're like, sure, before they took him away. And they went into a separate conference room. And he's like, can I ask you gentlemen a question? And they're like, sure. And he said, I want to make sure I'm getting this straight. I'm going to jail for pimping a bunch of hoes. So for him, it's a product. For the trafficker, it's a product. For the purchasers, it's an illness. And when I went over to talk to a friend of mine that worked for FDLE, I can conceptually, does not mean I agree with it. I want to make sure I'm really clear about this, but I can conceptually understand why a man would purchase to have sex with a woman, an adult female. I can get that. I couldn't understand why a man would choose to have sex with a child. And my friend with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement looked at me and he said, Jan, he goes, it's an illness. And they're never satisfied. There's never, ever a satisfaction after doing what they do. That's why when you see people that are caught for online child sexual abuse material, they've got thousands of files of hundreds of children because they're never, ever fully satisfied. It's literally a mental illness. And here's back to what you were pointing to. Back to that original point. Let's say you're an adult that quote, quote, has an attraction to children. I'm going to set that aside for a minute. That's on you as the adult. Children, your brain, our brains are not fully developed. The prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of our brain, is not fully developed until we're in our late 20s to early 30s. That's why if a child is trafficked, right, they don't have to use force, fraud, or coercion for them because we know their brain's not fully developed and they would never choose that life. And I really mean like choice, not, am I wearing jeans or shorts today? Choice, but like really a lifestyle choice because their brain does not have the kind of data it needs to have to make a valid decision and a choice. Okay. So if there's an adult that is quote, quote, attracted to young people, that's on them. They need to go get the help. They need to go talk to somebody about that because there are interviews on YouTube of pedophiles that say, you either got to keep me in jail or kill me because the moment you let me out, I'm going to go do it again. They're clear. It's like a drug to them. They're a drug addict. It's an illness. It is a sickness.
I think it's fascinating that you delineated this differentiation between people who are traffickers and people who are predators, sexual abusers, because some people are in the business of it, making money off those people who are the predators.
Yes.
I think it would be easy to say, they're all monsters, and you would be correct in saying so were you to say that. But there is this differentiation between the mindset of the people involved in these crimes. That's fascinating to me. And
it's what's even more interesting for the traffickers. For some of them, it's a family business.
Yeah, they're just stone cold about it. It's like a heroin pusher. Who cares if these people live or die? It's their fault they're buying the heroin from me, and I'm just, a conduit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I give a lot of background, Scott, for a reason. Our main premise for our organization is to educate, then we empower to prevent, right? So we've given a lot of data. We've given a lot of information, right? And now it's time to talk about how we're going to empower our men to step in and protect our families.
Well, as we segue to the meat and potatoes of this conversation, of course, which that is absolutely what it's about, the first thing that comes to mind is the cognitive biases that we possess as humans when we're not the monsters. And I defer to my good friend, Dr. Gleb Sapersky here, who has come on this show and changed all of our lives by showing us the blind spots in our own minds about these things. I think the vast, vast majority of the people out there, regardless of how much radical feminism wants to call all of us as men horrible simply for being masculine and born with a penis, etc. The vast majority of us, especially as men, are protectors. We're providers. We're against these people harming people who we perceive as vulnerable. That's what makes us heroes. That's what makes us good, positive role models as virtuous masculine men. So I think there's this blind spot that causes us just to refuse to believe there are very real monsters out there. And then, of course, you talked about how people who are predators, people who are, on the wrong side of the table here, will gaslight us into thinking, hey, you know what? You're no better than I am. I mean, remember when you were 14 and you were in school and, you hid with one of your little female classmates under the stairwell during a school dance? Well, she was only 14 then, so you're sexually attracted to young girls too. You're no better than I am. And people could start thinking, well, gosh, that's really kind of true. But, it leaves a whole lot of logic out of the discussion. Like now I'm 30, And indeed, you hear these stories, and I've heard them too, where people who are predators just failed to see themselves as having done anything really wrong. I mean, I'm a 45-year-old guy, and I got pictures of 12-year-old girls on my computer. Hey, it's because back when I was 12, I didn't get to make out with that little girl I still think about sometimes under the stairwell, and I'm just going back and making up for lost time. Well, no, you're a creep. Things are different now. But that is the kind of weird, twisted thought process that people will allow themselves to believe, because really, unless you are psychopathic, you don't want to see yourself as a monster. You may be confused when they come and raid your computer and drag you off to jail, because it's like, well, what did I do wrong? I didn't hurt anybody. This was a victimless crime. But the victims were the people in the pictures, which you are partaking of. Therefore, you're furthering the problem. You're part of the problem, not the solution. But nevertheless, those of us who can't possibly comprehend this sort of thing, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, to me, if you're sexually abusing people who aren't even sexually mature yet, I am all for throwing you in jail, throwing away the key. You can't let those people out again, because they're just robotically crazy. You said it yourself. They'll admit under certain circumstances that you better not let them back out. So how do we clear out these cognitive biases and, first of all, start realizing what's going on in society right now and start opening our eyes to the ways it can theoretically affect us? And perhaps for the purposes of this discussion with this group, we should separate what happens online from offline. What do you say? So let's go with the online part first. Talk to us about what goes on there. What do we look for?
So I want to put a pin in what you said. I have a friend that works for the FBI, Child Protection Services, and all he does all day is he has multiple profiles. He's either someone looking to buy children or a parent, quote, quote, selling children, right, specifically to catch offenders. The FBI currently only looks for people that want to have sex or sexual interactions with or requesting sexual content from 8 and under, because there's so much data in that realm. So to your point, yeah.
So even the FBI itself treats that as a more heinous crime than, say, anything Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein did.
Yeah. Well, they know there's just more content out there. There's more desire for that content than other content.
Really? You think there's more desire for little children than there are even for 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls?
There's so many pictures. There's so much content online for 8 and under. They can't spend their time on over 8.
That's just insane.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to put a pin in that.
Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So back to online predatory behavior, and it's gaslighting online, right? It's gaslighting in a realm of our children today, and all of us, quite frankly. We put our lives on social media, and in particular, young people, right? Young kids. They say where they ate, we know where they're going, who they're hanging out with, what they're doing today, what they're doing tomorrow. Here's my new outfit. Don't you think I'm cute, et cetera, right? They put their whole lives out online because everyone's doing that. And so all it really takes is a middle-aged adult, and I am going to say adult because remember we talked about it's not just men, it's women too. Men happen to be the higher percentage of it, and women participate. And there are predators that will send the same message out to 300 young people on Instagram. Hey, I saw you play soccer too. You're really cute. Your picture came up on my feed. I'd love to connect. So there's 300 DMs out there on Instagram. And they're just waiting for someone to bite. And all it takes, remember, the prefrontal cortex, decision-making part of our brain is not fully developed as a child. So all it takes is my mom yelled at me, my best friend broke up with me or whatever, or I got a C on a test and I'm in a vulnerable position in that moment and I'm not thinking clearly. And here's this cute boy comes up on my DM. I'm angry. I want to feel connected with someone. And I vaguely remember my parents saying, don't accept friend requests from people I don't know. So I might go out and I check his feed. He looks normal. Maybe there's a couple of contacts. I go back to the DM and I go, hi, and then starts a conversation. And it gets very intense very quickly. He pours his heart out to this girl or this boy, right? This adult pours their heart out because they've seen everything on their social media and what they're doing. So this is intentional. And they start to connect with them. Yeah, I saw you got a C in your test. I got a C on my math test too, but I'm going to study hard. You want to study together? So they start to build this rapport. And you got to remember, adult brain, child brain. Who's going to win that conversation? And within days, they're sharing pictures. Within a few more days, they're sharing explicit pictures. And maybe it goes a little too far. The little girl sends something that, she thinks she's in love. This is now her boyfriend because he knows everything about her. He shared everything about him. She sends a picture and then he asks for more and she's uncomfortable. And that's when the threats and coercion comes in and says, if you don't send me another picture, I'm going to send everything out to your friend group. Well, for a child, that's mortifying, totally diminishing their, social reputation, which is everything for them. And so the pictures continue.
That's just evil. The whole carrot and stick mentality. It had an agenda from the very beginning.
Yes, it does. Because, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, some of the data that they've discovered is 60% of the online offenders, they want sexually explicit images from children. That's what they want.
So from a parental perspective, first of all, we can't be naive. We can't act like everybody out there thinks and feels the way we do, and nobody would dare harm my little 7-year-old daughter online. We've got a ride herd on our kids' social media, for sure, and the kids are going to think we're awful, horrible, overreaching parents for doing so. They're going to yell at us. So what? We're not there to be their buddies. We're there to be their parents. We're there to raise them right. The other serious area online is these role-playing games, where kids pick an avatar and they wander around in a virtual world with other people, some being non-player characters, of course, but other people with a username who can interact with them online. So the kids, naturally, because of how our brains operate, look at this avatar and project that image onto whoever's behind that avatar. So there's this cute, fuzzy little squirrel they're talking to, when that's no fuzzy, cute little squirrel. And yet, I can't believe the parents who just let their kids sit on their iPads and play these games unbeknownst to the parents at all. They're off in their own little world, literally, where they're extremely vulnerable. So we just have to wake up as parents to that, don't we?
We do. And, there's a way to do it that doesn't push your child away. And as a man of honor and a protector, it's a really simple way to do it. And it's just asking questions or sharing knowledge. Right. So you can share something as simple as, hey, I was listening to this podcast today and I learned that the average age of children that are being enticed online to share, inappropriate pictures is like 10 to 13. Have you heard anything about that? And then you just be quiet and let them talk. And they might go, no, I haven't heard anything about that either. And go, well, I think that's, look, you've got a phone and I know, you're on social media. I'd love to learn more about that. Let's go investigate that together. So it's really being in the inquiry with them and asking open-ended questions and listening. That's all there is for us to do is listen.
How do you tell your 7 or 8-year-old or your 5-year-old why you're riding herd on their computer usage so much?
Well, the biggest battle for any parent is, but so-and-so gets to, or everybody's doing it, justifying the behavior. And we all remember the conversation our parents had. Well, if your best friend leaped over the cliff, would you go with them? Right. And it's not so much riding herd. It's having straightforward, empowering conversations with your children. They're already dealing with stuff. Our kids are getting anywhere from 8 to 10 unwanted, unsolicited DMs, messages, and images every single day. And so by having that conversation, be going, just gosh, what would you do? Have you ever thought about what you would do if somebody sent you a nude?
That's shocking. If my kid's getting 8 to 10 creepy missives every day, they're not going to be on that computer anymore. I'm done. I'm throwing in the towel.
Right. And that can't happen either. And that's the thing. And that's why training your kids to know what to look for is it's the most empowering thing you can do.
Well, what are we looking for exactly in the early stages there? And importantly, what do we do when we find it?
Yeah.
How do we report it? How do we put the kibosh on it?
Yeah. First question first, go back to the first question. So what do we look for? Well, there will be behavior changes in your child. They will become more secretive. The moment you walk in the room, they turn their phone over. If you even threaten or consider taking away their phone, which you got to remember, this is their lifeline to the world. It's what has saved children over the past 2 years. So taking away their phone as a form of punishment actually has a tendency to backfire. Okay. So you've got to is taking this phone away going to cause the same level of reaction as if I was trying to pull someone off heroin? Because it's a dopamine hit, the continuing dopamine hit. Highly recommend everybody watch The Social Dilemma. It'll alter your view of social media.
Is that the one on Netflix?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the catch-22 there is you have to lift your boycott on Netflix to watch The Social Dilemma, even after they've had the audacity to put movies up there like Cuties, right? So it's like a moral dilemma on whether I even should have the channel to watch that movie or not.
Yes. And you can always find it on YouTube, another thing most people are boycotting too.
Gotcha.
And they are on their website. They do have a website about this film and conversations you can have. It's sitting down and watching things with your children, educating your children, and noticing what they're doing and when they're doing it. Are they being more secretive in their room? Are they closing the door and locking the door so you just can't come in at any time? They have new groups of friends. They start talking about new groups of friends. That's like at the beginning pieces. The after, if they've actually done something they're embarrassed by or ashamed of, you'll start to see a withdrawal. You'll start to hear things like, I don't really want to go to cheer practice anymore, right? I don't really want to be on the track team anymore. It's taking up too much of my time. Watching grades drop dramatically. If you've got an A student and their grades go down to C's or D's, there's something happening.
Is this because of shame or stress or a combination of factors?
Yes, shame and embarrassment. If you're 14 years old and you've just sent an inappropriate picture to someone you thought was your boyfriend, and then they started threatening you, you're the feeling you have is you're trapped. I have to continue to do what this person's asking me to do. Okay. If not, they're going to share every single picture out there. Or I have to go face my parents who have told me I quote, shouldn't do that. I should know better. The shoulding has got to stop with parenting because our kids really don't know.
And that's indeed trafficking at that point.
Mm-hmm. It's online exploitation. You betcha.
So what do we do when we find out? How do we report these people? I mean, the anonymity of the internet can make it really difficult, can it? I mean, it could be even happening offshore.
Absolutely. So you can reach out to the National Center on Missing Exploited Children. Their website is missingkids.org. And you can report a tip there, or you can call their 24-hour hotline. And that number is 800-843-5678.
And I'll put that information in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Now, listen, it takes a lot of guts for parents to stand up to their kids like this because you're risking the relationship with your kid, but you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't become part of this gaslighting operation.
No. And the gaslighting is trying to tell us that things aren't happening when they are. You can go, again, to missingkids.org. They give you the numbers of the millions, 21.7 million child sexual abuse pieces of information they got last year. You can go to the Polaris hotline and see the number of calls they get from survivors. This is real. This is happening. And I invite every single one there's lots of survivor panels that have been videotaped and put on YouTube. And if you heard any of or read any of the information from the Maxwell case, you can listen to what she did. It's real and it's happening. And to have people think otherwise, Scott, that is gaslighting.
And also people feeling like this is an uncomfortable topic that I don't even want to address because I have too happy a life to be bothered with that stuff. But nevertheless, we'll put some of those resources on the show notes page, which I'm sure you'll provide me with. And moving our attention to the offline aspect of this, to kind of kick things off here, so many parents willingly deliver their children into the hands of possible predators because they've allowed themselves to believe this is good for their children. I wanted you to talk all about the grooming process for sure. But the first examples that come to mind are indeed Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, where no one has ever seemed to remember to ask, where were the parents of these teenage girls when all this was happening? And the short answer is those parents were led to believe this was good for their children. If I let my 14-year-old daughter hang out with this rich guy from Palm Beach, he'll pay for her college, he'll build a career for her. He just really seems to have taken a shine to my daughter and is really interested in promoting her. And then Ghislaine Maxwell, being a woman, comes kind of as a shill to add this apparent yet twisted aura of legitimacy to everything, because after all, she's genteel and she's female. Those people aren't sexual predators. I mean, she's clean. She doesn't act creepy. And that is perhaps the most insidious situation of all. You look at a Jerry Nasser. All the parents who had Olympic dreams, starstruck by the idea of their kid becoming famous and being a gold medalist, just decide, well, okay, he says he's a doctor and he says he's got to do these things to my daughter's body in the interest of, medically preparing her to be a great gymnast. So I'm going to go with the flow because the alternative is killing my kid's Olympic dream. But that's how this all works. The grooming process involves someone putting themselves in a position of power over our children with the apparent ability to promote them or to give them a gift or to influence their future positively, and then acting like such a really nice person who means well and projecting that image with the vast majority of people they happen across, to the point where when someone is abused and the creepy stuff starts and the untoward or even violent things start happening, people just refuse to believe any outcry. Therefore, the outcry doesn't happen because the person maybe has even been coerced into believing by the predator's threats that no one's going to listen to them. No one's going to believe them because I'm this great guy and I've helped so many people in the past. That's how it works, isn't it?
Yes, it's exactly how it works.
So you wonder how a guy like Larry Nasser can get away with abusing so many children. That's how, right?
Absolutely. They promise you the world and deliver you to hell. And because you, as a 14-year-old, are made to believe that it was really your choice. You wanted it. You said you wanted to go. You could have said no at any time. That kind of language. So you're telling me you didn't want to go to Paris. So why'd you go? That kind of line of thinking and questioning to a child has them start to doubt themselves.
And it starts off with this confidence building. They're confidence men, confidence women, these predators. I really like you. I think there's something special. You have a talent. You're going places. And they say nice things. And then those nice things kind of morph into affectionate things. You're like a son. You're like a daughter to me. I want to be your best friend. You're really special. Are you my special one? Are you my boy? Are you my girl? Say it. Say, you're my girl. And they start saying all these creepy things to people to get the child to agree, to get the child's head nodding up and down, almost like a weird Zig Ziglar bit to close a sale. And then once they're warmed up there, it's kind of the boiling of the frog, right? Once they're warmed up there, then they push the envelope a little more towards the sexual things. They start touching them. They start hugging them too much. At the risk of turning political here, they start sniffing their hair and whispering things into their ear and talking to 12-year-old girls about their dating lives. And don't let the boys kiss you, blah, blah, blah. You're too good for them. You need to find a guy like me someday. And all these cringeworthy, creepy things that go on. In full disclosure here, I went to a private school where the people in charge were positioned as incredibly benevolent people, and they were predatory. And I myself was a victim to some degree. And so this is something very close to my heart. And the weird thing is, even after those people are caught, you have this entire broad swath of people, not a mere cadre of people, but virtually almost everybody they knew, other than those who were the victims, going, well, this is impossible. This person was the greatest person ever. This person was best man at 200 weddings. Well, yeah, because these people who groom predators, they know better than to be creepy towards everybody because they would be found out. They wouldn't be able to work under the cover of darkness. But there's a pattern to who they're grooming. They look for people who are vulnerable. They look for people who won't ask and won't tell, don't they? And then everybody else is left to believe, well, this person couldn't possibly have been horrible. And therefore, the cycle continues because the weaker people, the less socially connected people, those kids aren't going to dare say anything because they know they'll just get swallowed up by the masses who think this person is incredible. They believe the predator when the predator says your outcry won't be heard. So go with it, or else your future's ruined. There's always this carrot and this stick, and there's always this image of this person being wonderful. And I know I'm on a rant here, and I know this is your area of expertise, and I want you to comment on it. But pardon me for being a little emotional about this. I've come to the conclusion where whenever someone who is not a blood relative, and let me issue the caveat, sometimes even blood relatives are the creepy ones, for sure. And I know you have something to say about that. But anytime someone takes a specific interest in my kid to the point where it's a little too much, or they seem like they're a little too good to be true, or they're a little bit too nice, my antenna are already perked. I'm already thinking, keep my kid away from that person. That's just not right. What do you have to say about any or all of this? I want to hear it.
So gaslighting is real. And, look, you have an as-lived experience, Scott. So you know this is real. You know the tools, you know the words, you know the verbiage of what they used to have you feel like it was okay and normal. And there's no way you would share anything with your parents because it was okay and normal. And then there's with survivors, there's the shame of the victim that keeps us quiet. It's really the perfect crime because you've got threats and coercion and manipulation on the traffickers and predators' part, and you've got shame, guilt, and embarrassment on the victim's part.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second because it goes beyond that sometimes. In my case, the predatory individuals held power over my future, and it was real, tangible power over my future.
Mm-hmm.
I report this guy. My future is over. This guy has the power to write a recommendation letter to Yale, Harvard, or Princeton for me and get me in uniquely. And he is listened to by those colleges. Whoever this guy recommends to Ivy League schools are the people who get in from his school. And that was a part of him setting up to be a groomer because he gives himself that power. He positions himself that way because what that does is it insulates him all the more from being called out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a continual promise. So Peter Nygaard, who was denied bail several weeks ago, his promise was, you can be my model. You can be one of my models. You can be my spokesperson. You can be my fill in the blank.
If Larry Nassar says your daughter's not physically fit or medically fit to be an Olympic gymnast, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
Insidious. It's just awful.
It is insidious. And the thing that really just, it's intentional.
And you know what? It's identifiable. The pattern is so often replicated and so predictable that if you know what you're looking for and who to look for doing it, you can just start picking them out of a crowd if you're in the know. You really can. You mentioned the example of traveling sales crews before we hit record on this particular episode, and I want you to expound on that a little bit. Tell us what that looks like.
Sure. So they happen in every single state. I promise you, every single gentleman that's listening to this podcast has seen kids with those big plastic tubs selling candy, candles, magazine subscriptions, whatever, for $5. And they have a thing around their neck that says they're raising money for XYZ organization. And it's for them to get to have a trip to go to wherever, camp, SeaWorld, to go to Disneyland, to go to a concert. There's always some future, back to your carrot and stick. And we've picked up kids from Florida that have gone all the way to Texas and been on traveling teams. And here's the challenge, is they really target underserved communities where you've got a single mom or both parents are working 6 jobs, 3 each, to keep food on the table and the electricity on. And summer's coming, or the holidays are coming, that 2 to 3 week holiday break where you work. What are you going to do with your kids? You can't leave them at home, right? They're 10, 11, 12, 13. They're not ready to be at home by themselves. And so along comes a nicely dressed woman or man and says, hey, we're putting together our team for the summer. We're raising money for XYZ camp, and the kids that earn the most will get a chance to go to SeaWorld. Sign here. We'll come pick them up at 7 a.m. We'll drop them off at 7 p.m. We'll feed them. We'll teach them life skills. They get to be with other kids. It sounds amazing.
It's entrepreneur camp.
Yes. So you sign the paper as the parent. Well, right there, you just basically signed your child away for them to do exactly what they said they were going to do, but not quite the way they promised it. So we're going to do simple math. Say they promise them that you could make $100 a day. Great. So you go out and buy those things. Yep, they pick them up at 7 a.m. and they feed them. They drive through the McDonald's drive-through and say you can pick 2 menus off the dollar menu. And oh, by the way, we're going to charge you $5 because we did stop. Okay. And then it's $1 for every bottle of water. It's $1 for every phone call every time you stop and make a phone call. And so by the end of the day, maybe you made, quote, quote, $100. But by the time they got done charging you with your lunch and your breakfast and your dinner and the bottles of water and the potty stops and the phone usage, maybe you go home with 10 or 20 bucks. Now, 10 or 20 bucks might seem like a lot of money, but who got the majority of the cash? The traffickers did. And I have stood in front of middle schoolers and shared this story. They all know what I'm talking about. And I had one little girl pull me aside and she goes, I did that last summer. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I was too embarrassed to tell my mom because I didn't want to be a burden.
Well, this is child labor trafficking, not necessarily sexual trafficking, or can it turn sexual?
Well, it could. It totally could.
But to be clear here, what you're talking about is a lot more like what goes on in Slumdog Millionaire, where they have a whole troop of kids who they've enslaved to be street beggars. If you've ever seen the movie, great movie, terrible section of the movie. That sort of thing isn't to be confused with a church youth group doing a car wash on Sunday.
No. This is intentional child labor trafficking.
The craziest part of all, in fact, is probably perfectly psychologically predictable, not crazy at all, is that the parents are all in on this and excited about it probably because, hey, it's summer and I'm getting free babysitting all day. I get to go do what I want in the middle of the summertime. So they kind of cast a blind eye to all this because they're getting some benefit out of it too. So they look the other way. They're part of the problem, which I guess brings me to the all-important question here. How do we stop turning a blind eye to this, see the warning signs we've talked about for what they are, and start doing something? How do we do that as men who care about our family members, the people we love, or even someone else's family member who we suspect something untoward is happening to, but their parents or the people who are supposed to be protectors of them aren't doing anything? What do we do? What can we do?
So I'm going to go back to the parent blind eye. I've been a single mom most of my life. I worked a high-level executive position, and I, too, was questioned, what do I do with my daughter at summertime? Finding the right camp, finding the right thing that she would be interested in, finding a safe place for my daughter is not the easiest thing to do. And it's not a blind eye. It's just not knowing. There's a veil of not fully understanding what child trafficking is, child exploitation is, and child labor is. And so the first thing we can do, Scott, is get ourselves educated. This show's a really great start. We've given a couple of resources, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Polaris Hotline that have national numbers. We have a great parenting toolkit on our website that parents can download and use as a talking tool to their kids, because that's the first place you've got to start, is having conversations with your kids. And we've got to stop the shoulds, coulds, woulds.
What would you do if you're really afraid? I mean, we realize that maybe the cabal is involved here. Obviously, these traveling sales crews are organized operations. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with fear we have over the potential safety of our kids or even ourselves? I mean, these people could come kill us if we call them out. How do you deal with that? How do you face that with courage?
Well, I lean into a higher power. So that's gives me my courage. And, the first thing, get educated so you can actually talk to your kids intelligently about it. Second thing, be in the inquiry. Be in the inquiry. I promise if you type in child trafficking, child exploitation, online trafficking, online, any of those terms, you will have a treasure trove of data for you to pull from. Same thing with YouTube. There's some really great films, videos on YouTube that you can share with your kids and sit down and have the conversation. Here's the thing. We've got to get out of this politically correct, I'm going to piss somebody off mode.
Well, it's fear-based.
Yeah, our children's lives are at stake. So we've got to stop worrying who we're going to upset, pull our big boy and our big girl pants up, and take some action.
Well, I think you made a really good point that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, we keep our kids out of this trouble to begin with by having the lights on to begin with, and we save all of ourselves the grief of having to face this with the kind of courage we're going to have to summon once it's going down. But That said, we as men have to be protectors and providers. We can't live in a fear-based world if we are going to man up and protect our wives and kids. Amazing conversation. Her name is Jan Edwards. She's the president of Paving the Way Foundation. And I'm going to send you to her website through a URL that I've set up for you, which is mountaintoppodcast.com/Edwards, her last name. And there you'll find a wealth of resources to equip you guys to be the kind of man, the kind of father, the kind of husband who indeed does his manly duty to keep those who we love out of trouble. Thank you so much for this very enlightening conversation today, Jan. I appreciate you coming. It's been very powerful.
Thank you for inviting me to join you, Scott.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about here, unfortunately, that I'd love to have you back on sometime relatively soon and we talk more about it because it just seems like time flew by. Gentlemen, be sure to go to mountaintoppodcast.com, visit our sponsors, Origin in Maine and herosoap.com. Both of our generous sponsors have a wealth of goodies on their respective websites that you can take a look at, make you feel more like a man, get you in better shape, make you more healthy, and smell good, depending on which one of the websites you're looking at. Origin in Maine is Jocko Willing's company. Everything there is done with excellence and determination and value in mind. And Hero Soap is veteran-owned and indeed offers a percentage of their profits to veterans issues all over the world. Two very worthy sponsors. You can find links to both at mountaintoppodcast.com. Gentlemen, whether you're in a relationship already that you would like to take from good to great, or maybe you're suffering a little bit in that relationship and want to do better, both you and your honey feel that way, or if you're a guy who doesn't have the right woman in his life just yet, give me a call. Let's talk about putting a plan of action together that will take you to where you want to be right here in the year 2022. Gentlemen, this is important stuff. Who you're going to be with for the rest of your life and the relationship you have with her is arguably the most important consideration you have in this life. Go to mountaintoppodcast.com, get on the phone with me for free, absolutely free, won't cost you a dime, and let's talk about what it's going to take to make this happen in your life. I guarantee you that you will emerge from that call with something actionable that you will be able to take with you today as proof of concept and results in advance, as I like to call it. So go to mountaintoppodcast.com, and I hope to talk to you again real soon. Speaking of which, I hope to talk to you again real soon on this very podcast in the next episode. And until then, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.